left and right. Before we start, could the officers declare who they are, please?
Good evening, councillors. My name's Zach Elwood. I'm the new Head of Planning and Economic Development.
Good evening, councillors. Beth Howland-Smith, Development Manager.
Good evening, councillors. Chris French, Area Team Leader.
Good evening, Philippa Stadden, Senior Planning Officer.
Good evening, councillors. Barry Devlin, Planning Solicitor.
Chris Berry, former Interim Head of Planning and Economic Development, and delighted to be handing over to Zach, but here just for this one item as my swan song. Thank you.
Thank you. Fiona, are there any apologies and declarations of substitutes?
Thank you, Chairman. We've had apologies from Councillors Val Henry, Peter Isherwood, Sally Dixon, John Neal and George Hess.
Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest? None have been declared so far. No, there are none. So we only have one item then, which is the application for planning permission, WA 2019-1171, land-centred coordinates on west side of Green Lane, Badgott Lee. So, Philippa, do you want to present the application, please?
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. This site is an allocated site in the Waverley Local Plan Part 1 2018 and the Farnham Neighbourhood Plan 2017 for 105 units. Outline permission was granted in November 2018 for the erection of up to 105 dwellings, including 32 affordable dwellings, together with associated works. The application seeks approval of reserved matters, layout, scale, appearance and landscaping. As part of this application, the applicant is entering into a deed of variation to secure the provision of 30% on-site affordable housing, amended contributions towards SANG and education infrastructure. I draw members' attention to the update sheet, which sets out a number of corrections to the officer report, the wording of the recommendation and to condition 5. I also have 3 verbal updates. With regard to the power lines that run across the southeast corner of the site, officers have received confirmation from Scottish and Southern Energy that the proposed structures within the development do not violate the required safety clearances to the overhead power lines. The Council's Environmental Health Officer has been consulted on this matter and has confirmed they have no objection to the position of the dwellings in relation to the power lines. And a SUD scheme located on land to the south of the site has been approved under WA 2019-1514. As part of the deed of variation, the existing obligation to submit an open space specification and management plan to the Borough Council for its approval has been varied so that the area beneath the power lines is suitably managed. The SUD scheme also forms part of the deed of variation. As such, recommendation A is amended as follows. That permission be granted subject to the applicant entering into a deed of variation to the existing legal agreement within 3 months of the date of the committee resolution to grant planning permission to secure the provision of 30% on-site affordable housing, amendments to the open space obligations, amended contributions towards SANG, education infrastructure, SUDs, and subject to conditions and informatives. And I'll now take you through the proposal. So here we have the location plan and aerial photograph. The application site is south of Lower Waverley Lane and west of Green Lane and Badgott Lee. Oh, lights off. That better? Okay. The application site is south of Lower Waverley Lane and west of Green Lane and Badgott Lee. It currently comprises an agricultural field. The site is bound to the north and west by residential properties on Lower Waverley Lane and Wentworth Close. And to the east is a Scottish and Southern depot here. And public footpath 103 runs east-west to the south of the site. So moving on to the proposed layout. Oh, I should go back and say that access was agreed as part of the outline from Lower Waverley and Green Lane there. So that was approved at outline. Moving on to proposed layout, it would constitute 105 dwellings with an area of open space, including a leap and lap to the southeastern corner here. As I just said, the access was approved at outline and would be off Green Lane. The existing footpath is here, and there are links from Green Lane. That's an existing link from Green Lane, and an additional link would be provided as part of the development to existing play area at Wentworth Close here, and the footpath is there. Yeah, as I said, there's an existing play area that is accessed currently from Wentworth Close there, and we'll come into a bit more of the detail as we go. So moving on to some site photographs. Photograph A shows the existing play area at Wentworth Close that I just mentioned. Photograph B is taken from the north, looking towards the location of the approved access, which would be here. Photograph C is taken from the west, looking along the footpath that runs across at the moment. Photograph D shows the existing link to the footpath that runs to the south of the site. Photograph E is taken from the north along the western boundary of the site. F is taken from the south, looking towards the northern boundary with Lower Waverley Lane. G is taken from the west, looking along the northern boundary, here. Photograph H is taken from the south, looking towards the northern boundary. Photograph I is taken from the south, looking along the eastern boundary. The access would be approximately here. Oh, sorry. Photograph J is taken from the northwest, looking towards the southern boundary, and K is taken from the northeast, looking towards the southwestern corner. So the proposed development would have a loop road layout. The dwellings would be largely fronting the street with back-to-back gardens. So on this slide, I've showed the proposed dwelling distribution. So the key's not very clear, but I'll describe it to you. So yellow is 1 bed, blue is 2, green 3, and 4, purple is 4. So you can see that the larger dwellings are orientated to the northwestern corner. In terms of the shared ownership, they are in the pink and red colours, with again 1 to 3 bed, and the brown indicates the affordable rent units, so the darker colour indicates the 3-bed units there. On this slide I've shown you the proposed storey heights, so the majority of the dwellings are 2-storey in height with the single-storey garages, and there are a few examples of 2.5-storey properties. In terms of the parking provision, the proposal would provide 265 spaces in total. However, this does include instances of triple tandem parking with the inclusion of garaging. Excluding those triple tandem spaces, 236 spaces would be provided, which would exceed the council's parking guidelines by 7.5 spaces. In terms of waste and recycling, curbside bin collection points would be provided, as indicated in this extract here. It's quite small, I know, but the curbside collection is there. Communal refuse storage and collection points would be provided, but for the apartments, that's where I've put these purple arrows. And owing to the loop road formation, refuse collection vehicles would be able to access the majority of the units in forward gear with sufficient turning space where this is not the case. In terms of landscaping, this diagram here shows the southern boundary. So this section here is what I've shown in this picture here, and it shows there's a 2.3 metre buffer with trees, shrubs and hedging, and that is within the red line. So the red line is here, and then there is the buffer, and then it's the rear fences of those units. The existing hedging on the eastern boundary here would be retained, but there is a plan to clear out some of the ditch there, which is rather overgrown to aid the drainage. Condition 8 on the officer report requires details of screen walls, fences and other means of enclosure to be submitted. And the hard standing includes tarmac, key block paving, concrete slabs and concrete sets. And the play area would have a hog-in path with timber edging, which I've shown here. So here we have a couple of proposed street scenes. The proposed dwellings would be of a traditional design with different roof forms, footprints and materials. Materials would include a mixture of red brick, red multi-brick, tile hanging, render and brown and grey roof tiles. We have a few more street scenes here. So in terms of, we'll move on to the matters for consideration for members tonight. The principle of development was agreed at outline stage. So at this stage, we're looking at the layout, landscaping, scale, and appearance. The housing mix and affordable housing, the Council's housing enabling team have assessed the proposal and are satisfied that the proposed mix is acceptable. In terms of landscape and appearance, some concern was raised regarding the relationship between the proposed development and existing trees and hedging on the western boundary with regard to the potential pressure to remove branches. Notwithstanding this, the proposed landscaping and provision of open space to the southeast of the application site is considered acceptable, as is the wider landscaping around the site. In terms of design and impact and visual amenity, the design is considered acceptable and in character with the area, as are the materials. In terms of the impact on residential amenity, the layout of the site would see the gardens of the proposed dwellings adjoining the rear gardens of existing properties on Lower Waverley Lane and Wentworth Close. This is considered to be a common relationship and has enabled the separation distance between the dwellings to be maximised. The proposed layout is considered acceptable, and as detailed earlier, the parking provision would exceed the Council's parking guidelines by 7.5 spaces. The scale is considered acceptable. In terms of standard of accommodation and amenity space, the scheme is considered to provide a good level of accommodation and level of amenity space to future occupiers. A dedicated leap and lap would be provided to the southeastern corner of the site, as well as access to the existing lap at Wentworth Close. The waste recycling and cycle storage is considered to be acceptable. Access was approved under the outline permission. However, County Highway Authority have assessed the reserve matters application and have raised no concerns, subject to the compliance with conditions attached at outline stage. And in terms of flood risk and drainage, this was considered under the outline permission, and the acceptability of the proposal was therefore accepted, subject to conditions. The lead local authority has reviewed the proposal and is satisfied that the proposed drainage scheme accords with that approved at outline. A separate application was recently approved for a swale and pond for drainage attenuation for the development. This also forms part of the deed of variation. So for the reasons set out in the officer's report, the application is recommended for approval, subject to the revised recommendation A that I set out earlier. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, can I just be clear what the revised recommendation is? I've got one version which is in the papers for the... yeah, can I... Okay, I can read that when we move forward. Okay, are there any comments from members? Councillor Keane?
Thank you, Chairman. Just on the affordable, could you point out again where the affordable is, please?
It's
hard to,
thank you for your question. So the shared ownership units are the sort of reddy, pinky ones here, and the affordable rents are the browner colours.
I find it quite sad that the affordable are stuffed into one corner. And, you know, the thinking is that it should be more integrated. I find that quite a sad thing.
There were some words in the report about that, was it? It was considered that it was still considered to be acceptable, I believe, by officers. Okay, we can come back to that. Councillor Townsend.
Thank you. A couple of things. I noticed that Thames Water has identified an inability of the existing foul water network infrastructure to accommodate the needs of the development and requested a couple of conditions, but I can't see those conditions attached to the application. And they also requested an informative as well. So that hasn't, I just wondered why they're not attached to the application. Did you want to answer that first of all before I move on to my next point? Thank you.
Thank you. So the conditions attached to the outline still apply to the reserve matters, so they would still need to comply with that as part of the application.
Okay, there is a condition on the outline, but it's not as specific as what is written into this particular. I just wanted to make sure that we're not losing the informative, and there isn't anything that we're missing out there, because it's obviously very important. Whilst you're looking for that, the other thing, the lead local flood authority, obviously that was decided in the outline, but did actually refer to the site layout that they were looking at, which was 2797-A-1005-PL-H. I couldn't find that site layout within the list of layouts on the conditions either. And it is important, obviously, that the layout that the lead local flood authority is looking at is the same layout as we are approving here tonight. Otherwise, it could affect where the SUDs are and how the SUDs actually work. So I just want to make sure they do specifically, and it's quite unusual, they specifically referred to that drawing within their letter saying that they were okay with the application. And then my last point is that the ecology report attached to the outline actually mentions that there are bats present, and they mention that there are, but they say that as none of the trees are being affected, that they haven't done any further kind of survey. Now, I notice now we're saying that plot 24, 16, 20 to 23, there is going to be an impact on the trees, and they are going to be actually quite maybe reduced, and the crowns are going to have to be reduced down. So now, with that in mind, surely we should have some updated surveys on the bats, because this will be affecting them. And I'm disappointed as ever. You won't be surprised to hear me going on again about bat surveys, but the bat surveys were done back in 2013 or maybe 14, but around that time, surely there comes a point where they are not fit for purpose anymore. You know, I'm really disappointed that we're not more careful about the wildlife. We have an opportunity, it's said within the ecology report, to put bat boxes, to put nest boxes up. How do they fit now in this outline application, in this reserve matters application? Should the bat boxes and the bird boxes be actually referred to? Should we have locations for them? You know, I'd be interested to hear what officers have got to say. Thank you.
Are there any points that you want to answer now? Yes, please.
The layout was in the email dated the 24th of September from the Lead Local Flood Authority.
In terms of the Lead Local Flood Authority question and the plan reference, we've got 1005 PLH, which is listed on our list of plans. So I think yeah, that's covered. We've also consulted the Wildlife Trust on the application, and there's a requirement for a landscape ecological management plan, and we've conditioned that through the current scheme. And a lot of the ecological issues would have been dealt with at the outline stage in terms of the requirements for surveys at that point. So there's nothing further that we're asking for at this stage.
Can I just come back on that, Chairman? Can I just say, within the ecological survey, though, it specifically mentions, hang on a minute, let me just open this up, that unless the proposals, adverse impacts on bats are considered to be unlikely unless the proposals require the felling or surgery of mature trees on safety or other grounds, or involving illuminating the adjacent woody vegetation. Now, we don't have any light, we don't have anything about light and it being bat-friendly lighting on this as a condition. And we are now saying within this application that we are affecting, you know, the trees. So although I'm not saying that you needed to get another survey, I'm just saying what impact does that have? We've got habitat regulations we're meant to be abiding by. So I just want to know how we are managing to get around that when it specifically states in the ecological survey.
Is there an additional condition we could apply to just to address that point in terms of the work to trees? Councillor Stanton, we'll come. I think we'll come back to at the end. Councillor Adams, have you spoken yet? No.
Thank you, Chairman. No, actually, I was going to raise the issue of lighting as well. I was going to wonder, in light of the bats, I was going to ask the officers if they could explain what the lighting structure around the site is going to be and how they're going to ensure that they're dimmed at the right times.
Thank you, Chairman. We could add a lighting condition, so we could secure details of lighting through the condition, and we could put an informative in relation to ensuring that it doesn't have an impact on bats, so that they're provided to a low level in certain areas. It would also have to integrate with the landscaping management plan as well. So so the lighting should kind of be integrated into that. Thank you.
Councillor Follis.
Thank you, Chair. Just following on from Councillor Keane's comment, and if I've misinterpreted this from the table, please do correct me. It mentions in there that obviously the clustering in those two locations is acceptable according to officers. It also mentions something about the design would not be materially different from market to shared ownership / affordable rent. However, when you look at the table, which I'm afraid, because I'm looking at the electronic version, there is no page numbers. When you look at the table of the space standards, although they might be the same designs, they do look like they're going to be quite a lot smaller. So they will be probably quite obviously different, the affordable and shared ones. Even if they are physically similar in design, they will be quite obviously smaller. Am I interpreting that correctly? Because it does look like they are. Is that? I'm looking at you. I think you're looking at the 50. I'm looking at that bit. Sorry, there's no page number. Are they going to be comparable? Some are flat. Right. Okay. Fair enough. No, thank you.
So, was there a question left, Councillor Follis?
Councillor Else has commented, okay. And I think I'm happy with that if he's happy with it.
Yeah. Councillor Evans.
Thank you. Sorry, I've got a number of questions. Considering the development situation of atmospheric pollution, have there been any discussions between Waverley and Surrey County Council Highways as regards the impact of this development on Farnham pollution levels at any time? That's the first question.
Take one by.
Sorry. Yeah. I do have to say in this regard, Chairman, that we have received quite a lengthy message from Councillor Edmonds regarding a number of questions on this application. I don't know if he's anticipating going through those. There's about a page of them. Quite a lengthy list of concerns, most of which I think we can safely say we've taken into account, and we would be prepared to obviously respond, I think, post the meeting to Councillor Edmonds, if that would be acceptable. But it is a little difficult. It is a long list of questions, and I don't know whether that...
Sorry, Chair, they are vital and they're very important, especially regarding climate change.
I think it's fair to say, if I may, that the impact on the Farnham air quality management area has not been taken into account on account of it's a fair distance away. And it's not a requirement for us to do that at this stage. Obviously, when we're looking at development management policies in Part 2 and so on, we can strengthen the Council's concerns in this area, but at the moment, we're not required to take those into account, and it's also regarding matters with concern to disabled parking and so on, which Councillor Edmonds, I know, is wishing to raise. these are matters that are not presently covered by council policy. Very reasonable for them to be done so in the future. And I think certainly we will take those into account with ongoing work that takes account of things like climate emergency and so on, which I know very justifiably are Councillor Edmonds' concerns. But they aren't covered by present policy at the moment. And his message, his letter to us, his email to us, if I may say so, does cover those, in large part, those issues that are for future consideration rather than constituting present policy. Thank you.
Sorry, Chair, the parking guidelines are part of the Discrimination Act and therefore should be covered, especially as regards the size of disabled parking spaces.
We could deal with that one. Can we please deal with that one? Yes,
yes, happy to do so, Chairman. It may be reasonable that they should be, but they're not in present council policy, and it's for members to raise that when we review, quite possibly in Local Plan Part 2, would be the right place to do that. But presently, I can assure Councillor Edmonds that present policy, council policy, does not cover this area, and it hasn't been considered in this application.
Sorry, the climate change policy is Waverley Borough Council policy.
I think the point is we haven't decided how to implement that. Therefore, we can't apply that to developers. When we have developed it into a detailed policy, then we can, but we can't do that now.
Sorry, it's published on the council web.
But there are no policies which flow from that. No detail about how we might expect developers to implement what we have agreed, and we haven't agreed it yet. So I don't think we can arbitrarily say that applications can be dealt with against rules, procedures that we haven't yet set in place.
Mr. Chairman, if I could assist, many of these matters are now being raised at this juncture, which are will have the effect, if members defer the matter, will have the effect of frustrating the implementation of the consent. It seems to me that the committee is in danger of raising matters now and introducing matters now which go against the fundamental principle of consent that the Council already determined and is now raising fresh legalities, rendering the Council open to challenge by the developer on the basis of unreasonable behaviour. And that's the danger area we're getting into, I think. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I mean, I appreciate what the councillor is saying, but Evans is saying, but it's I don't think this is a particular application is the place to raise it. We raise it under the discussions we're going to be having in great detail about things like this, but it's not. We can't apply it to this application. I think that's just a fact.
So am I to assume that the local plan is not valid?
I don't think these matters are in the local plan.
I think it's fair to say, Chairman, I completely share Councillor Edmonds' frustration in some respects, because we would all like, I think, in the light of climate emergency declaration and so on, that issues had been sort of overnight. We could change policy to take account of them, implement the actions which you've taken and which you wish to adopt. But the fact is we'd have to go through the process of Part 2 and possibly review of Part 1 of the local plan to make sure that these concerns that are identified at a strategic level, in some cases, means that we can redefine, reinterpret policies that are in Part 1 at the moment, but we haven't done that work yet to be able to make them relevant directly to reserved matters applications and so on. It's something that is absolutely going to be a priority of the service, and I know my successor will be wishing to take this on in conjunction with discussions with members, but at the moment we don't have policy that covers this area to the extent that Councillor Edmonds would wish, and many of the rest of us, I'm sure.
I have a copy of Local Plan 1, which is what I was referring to. Thank you.
Councillor Dinas.
Thank you. It's actually quite difficult to concentrate because all I can hear is the film being played in the background and hear singing and everything else. So hopefully I'll get it through. It's coming through the door from downstairs. We can hear, we can keep hearing singing. Just a few observations, if I may. And I know it's probably a planning term when we say this is acceptable, but I do find it quite sad when, as a council, we just accept things. We should be striving for excellence, in my view. And I looked at the proposed layout and the indicative. I thought the indicative was awful, and the proposed is better, but it's no imagination at all. If this was my area, I think I'd be banging on the table saying, surely we could do better on that. A couple of positives, I think, from the report, because I think it's fair to balance some of these issues. I think I was really pleased to see when a condition's been recommended and we actually show in the report what that condition number is. It saves so much time trying to work out that everything has been covered. So that was a real positive. And some of the other bits in the report I thought were very, very good. I suppose my disappointment is, and bearing in mind members of the JPC come and go and we change, that we talk about there's a number of conditions set many years ago, and I've suddenly come back onto JPC in the last few weeks, and I don't know what those conditions are, because I looked at it and thought, where's the vehicle charging condition? Now, is it in the one? You say this, but I like to check. So my plea is probably for future, if we've got conditions that are set, why don't we just put them in the report so we don't have to second guess and we can just make sure they are all covered. Just one final thing which I think is disappointing, and again, unless I haven't done the diagram correctly, is there's no bungalows. And I think at a time where there is a greater need, I think there's some one-bedroom places, but please correct me if I'm wrong, no bungalows. And I think at a time when we've got an Asian population in Waverley, and we will have the highest percentage of over 65s and over 80s in Surrey, we've got no bungalows. I just think that's a shame that maybe could have been built into it. So I think really it's okay, this application. I can't say I'd be dancing with joy over it, but it's okay.
Can officers just ask the point about whether there are bungalows in?
No, there aren't any, Chairman.
Okay, I'm informed there are none.
No, Chairman.
Okay. Councillor Hunt.
Yeah, so I've got a few points to raise and a couple of questions as well at the end. So in terms of Councillor Dean's comments on striving for excellence, I mean, I think one of the points I wanted to raise was that I understand that we're supposed to be considering appearance, landscaping, layout and scale of development. And I agree in respect of the appearance and the layout and the landscaping. So I represent Webber and Badshot Lee and live up the road. And to me, the appearance of this development is just another, Legoland kind of throw-up development with no real kind of difference between the style and build of the housing on the development. And it's the kind of development really that you see thrown up all over the country in a pretty short period of time by developers, and then they move on. And the community that lives there is stuck with it for decades. But to try and substantiate that comment a little bit, I was reading Building for Life 12 by the Design Council, which I believe the MPPF references. And, in terms of good design, it does specify that the examples of good design are where you vary the density, built form and appearance or style of developments to help create areas with different character within larger developments. And looking at the design of the houses here and the layout, it could be, as I say, it looks like somebody's thrown it up with some Lego, and it looks the same as every other development that goes up anywhere in the country. So for me, I do think it is quite disappointing, and certainly is not kind of striving for excellence, as Councillor Dean has just said. The other thing I wanted to kind of reference as well in terms of the layout, there's no reason for anybody to anybody who lives in that area at all to kind of venture into this development as it stands, you know, with this kind of loop layout. And I do think as well that there is potential for, you know, a form of kind of social isolationism for these developments where there is no need or recourse for anybody externally to kind of go through these developments. So I think the layout and the style of the houses and the uniformity of the design is quite disappointing, as is the blocking of the kind of affordable housing in the bottom section has already been referenced. I've got a couple of questions as well. I couldn't see anything in respect of electric vehicle charging in the application. So is it there? And if it's not there, then to me that should be a prerequisite really for any development of this kind that is tailor-made for houses to have EV charging installed.
I believe it's in the outline.
It's in the outline, is it? Okay, so that will be there, will it? Definitely. How many? One per house, is it?
Thank you. The condition requires a scheme to be submitted. Electric vehicle charging points for every dwelling and a communal charging point for blocks of flats.
For every dwelling, meaning every house, presumably. Yeah, and for every kind of block of flats. And then there's a question as well about the SAN contribution. So my understanding is that the developer is aiming for the SAN contribution to go towards a site that's actually based about 9 miles away. You know, if so, why? And why shouldn't they be? Why shouldn't they have to have that contribution to go within the immediate area? You know, Farnham Park, anywhere else. My understanding is at the moment that they're trying to have that for a site which is based in Fleet or Church Crookham, which is about 9 miles away, which seems pretty ridiculous to me. So I don't know if you can comment on that.
Thank you. So there is an application outstanding regarding that matter, but as part of this application that we're determining tonight, they have entered into a deed of variation to secure the SAN payments towards Farnham Park. So that is what we're considering tonight.
Okay. So, you know, in short, I mean, I think if we're considering landscaping, layout and scale, the appearance and the landscaping for me is indistinguishable from any other development that you would see go up by a national house builder across the country, and we should be aiming for better. I mean, the outline I think they've put through for up to 105 dwellings, if you like, and therefore, you know, when it comes to the reserve matters, obviously they're trying to put as many buildings in there as possible. And I think that's, you know, disappointing as well. So I would personally have a hard time giving my vote to it as it is at the moment.
Councillor Gray. I know you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for coming to me. But I've actually had most of my points, I think, answered. But can I come back on the electric charging points? You've mentioned it's covered in the outline. I couldn't see any reference to the size and the type of charging point, and we have included this before, whether this is 3 kV or whether it's 7 kV. What we've been trying to do is to get in there the higher rate rather than just a minimum of 3. Also, there was some discussion previously about how we were going to make it available for the flats. And is that covered in the outline? And my apologies, I haven't.
Thank you. Just to say they're required to submit a scheme for the electric vehicle charging point. So it would be at that point that it would be determined if the rate was acceptable that they were putting forward. So it doesn't specify, but they are required to put forward a scheme that is acceptable.
Sorry, if I could come back on that. What you're saying is it's just that they put electric vehicle charging points in the outline, but there's no specification. Well, in that case, what we should be doing here is actually making sure we specify.
If I may comment, Chairman, if you wish to specify a particular charging point, then we'd be happy to include that as a condition.
Well, I certainly would like to make sure that we use 7 kVs and not leave it at 3.
And John, say that?
Through you, Chairman. I think one thing that I've picked up, obviously I'm very new, it's only day 2, but I think Councillor Dinas and Councillor Hunt made a very valid point about, they've asked questions about things that have already been dealt with under the outline, but I can totally forgive that because we haven't given you a copy of the outline permission. So I was just going to say that moving forward, I think where we've got a reserved matters application where there's an outline, I would suggest that we will reproduce the decision notice with the conditions so that we can avoid some of these things. I think that would be helpful. Yeah.
Councillor Coburn.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I sort of agree with everyone, really. There's an extension in a nearby ward to me which has been held up for 6 months because of bats. There's no sign of bats, but they've still got to do a second survey, and that we have a much more damaging application, and we seem to sort of, put things to one side. So I do agree with Councillor Townsend that if we're serious about our borough and the biodiversity within it, then every single application should be dealt with robustly, and we should be asking for these things and mitigating any harm. There's bound to be harm here if there are bats and the trees are damaged in any way or cut down, then obviously we have potential harm. So I have to say, I do think generally we need to sharpen up what we do in terms of the effect of any development in any part of the borough, on the environment, the natural environment. In terms, it's funny, I've written down exactly the same words as Councillor Dinas has used. I put a question mark at acceptable. I spent my life trying to tell people to aim for excellence and the hope that, they get somewhere close to it. This is the very first word that came into my mind when I looked at it. It's okay, and that's as enthusiastic as I can get about it. I picked up my 11-year-old grandson the other day, and he was telling me all about his geography lesson, and they had been learning that in the centre of a town you have your little terraced houses, and as you go out into the inner suburbs you get your 3-bedroom semis, and then you get your bigger houses on the outskirts. All of that theory, which I don't know which textbook it came out of, we've thrown out of the window with this desire to put developments like this across the borough, and as Councillor Hunt said, up and down the country. And just by definition, this is never going to sit very comfortably with what's around it, because what's around it is not an assortment of flats, 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom. It's not the way the pattern of development has happened in the past. And we're automatically getting these identikit applications in where they're having to, they want to put the full 105 in, which is what we gave outline permission for, even though perhaps 102 or 103 or even 99 might be better on this site. So I'm finding this really, really difficult. It isn't a site that's in the neighbourhood plan. I walked every inch of it. It's in our local plan part 1. And we've given it reserve matter, outline matters, outline planning consent. I just wish that there had been more community involvement. I can't believe there's been a huge amount from my post bag. I don't know how much input there was from the local councillor, and he can answer that. But to me, this doesn't feel Badshotly at all. It's just a group of houses. I don't see how it relates to anything along the Wentworth Close or Webburn Lane at the top, Webburn Road at the top. It's just, as I say, one of the many we've seen. And my final point really is parking. The one thing we do know about Badshotly and Webburn is that there's not an inch of extra parking anywhere. It's a nightmare. It wasn't built for the car any more than lots of places. And we've had applications in before where we can almost see how they're going to develop. Narrow roads, not a great deal of parking. So what happens? You get that awful half on the road, half on the pavement parking. And I hate it when we're giving permission for things that are just not going to work properly. I think an extra 7.5, I know we can't turn it down on that. I know the you know, the guidance. But quite frankly, it's not a generous oversupply at all in this area. And I fear for the future of this development, because there will be more cars. The garages will be used for everything else, as they always are, and the cars will be one near the house and one half on the pavement, half on the road. And I just feel, yes, disappointed, I think is the word for this. I just feel it's not been really worked through with the local community, and I don't think it really reflects the pattern of development in the local area. It's, as Councillor Dean has said, okay.
Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. I note that there is a substantial amount of vegetation, trees and hedgerows around the site, and there's going to be a 2-metre buffer zone along the south side. And that Surrey Wildlife Trust has said they'd be pleased to comment on any detailed landscaping plan. Can the officers just confirm that once the landscaping plan has been agreed with the developer, it will be resubmitted to the Wildlife Trust?
Thank you. Thank you. So condition 17 of the outline states no development shall take place until a landscape and ecological management plan to ensure the appropriate management of existing and proposed habitats in the long term has been submitted to and approved in writing by the local planning authority. It goes on a bit, but we would consult Surrey Wildlife Trust as part of that being submitted in order to discharge the that condition. Thank you. Yes, and that's pre-commencement condition. Thank you.
Councillor Costa.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I just wanted to offer a couple of reflections and maybe some questions about some of the comments I've heard about design and layout. Now, my understanding, I wasn't here at the time to do this, is that we've given outline permission for 105 dwellings. So I'm finding it difficult to understand some of the concerns being expressed about design and layout. The layout one I particularly didn't understand. I mean, I think it was Councillor Hunt referred to isolationism or something of that order. Frankly, if I were to contemplate buying a property on this development, I wouldn't want lots of people tramping past my house for all sorts of extraneous purposes. And I suspect that that's probably true of a number of other people as well. So it may be that there's another point he has there, but I genuinely couldn't understand what the objection is in terms of layout. In terms of design, I think that's always a tricky one. I mean, actually, somebody might present something that I find quite attractive and somebody else finds quite unattractive, and I've actually come across that in planning committees before. But if you've given permission for 105 units on that particular site, I'm struggling. Well, I'm quite happy to be corrected, Councillor Townsend. I did say I wasn't involved in that decision, and if I've misunderstood this, I'm sure you or someone will be happy to correct me. I'm not convinced as to what else we might come up with. And I think it's quite revealing in some ways that the comments suggest that there are lots of developments of similar ilk being built by developers right across the country, that there's an economic question here, and people will take choices about what they can afford to buy and what sort of design is acceptable to them. And I think we have to have a certain degree of realism when we're looking at some of those issues.
Thank you. Councillor Alt.
Oh, thank you, Chairman. I'm afraid I'm going to have to disagree with Councillor Costa.
You wouldn't be the first.
I've almost given up hope of a reserved matters application coming before us that shows any sign of imagination in layout or design, and it impresses me but disappoints me as well that Waverley's own social housing shows a lot more imagination and blends in much better with the surrounding area than anything that a commercial developer can come up with who's trying to sell them at maximum profit. The outline application was for 105, it was for up to 105, so it doesn't mean that we have to cram them in. the number of one-bedrooms has reduced and the number of three-bedrooms has gone up, so obviously by that account the built form must be larger than was shown on the indicative. But I think back to a few years ago when we were having sites like this coming up with reserve matters in Cranley, and it seemed we were looking at one a week almost. And at that time, the JPC was bold enough to say to the developers, no, this isn't good enough. You may think it's acceptable, we don't. Go back, you could do better. And we either deferred them or refused them, and they came back with better schemes. They came back with better designs for the units. They came back with the affordable housing spread around the site, not dumped in a corner. They came back with, I mean, we talk about, what is it, tenancy neutral or something, whatever the catchphrase is. But affordable housing always gets dumped with large parking courts, large areas of concrete outside of them, instead of nice little individual spaces that the rest of the site benefits from. And I think we should say, no, could do better, come back with a better scheme. Thank you.
Sorry, councillors who wish to speak again now, can they please contain their remarks just to what others said, perhaps not launch off on new points. So Councillor Townsend, then Hunt. Councillor Hunt, then Councillor follows.
Thank you. I am going to go back on the point because I can't find the layout number for that was listed. So Chris, please point me to the layout that was 2797A 1005 PLH. If you could find that for me, that would be great. I also haven't had any comeback on the Thames Water, and the condition is very different to the first condition that was put on the outline. And I can look at the outline application. I can find it on the internet, and I can look at it, and I do look at it, and I have compared the condition. Also, the informative is very different as well. So I just want to make sure that we are scooping it up. It's really important. This is not only to do with the sites having adequate provision, but also to do with the sewage treatment works having adequate provision and the effluent that they then put into our rivers. So it's to do with biodiversity. I also I'm talking about the layout here. The trees are now being affected. We've got several plots which are affecting the trees. The ecology survey, it's nothing to do with the construction environmental management plan. The ecology survey specifically says about the bats and about the trees not being effective. We've got habitats regulations. We should be abiding by them. We should be saying, actually, this will affect, and we shouldn't have this layout. We should have a different layout that doesn't affect the trees, and that is my point. The layout, which we are looking at tonight, does affect the trees, which could then affect the bats. We either care about the bats or we don't care about them at all, but we have got regulations. So I want to know where that number is for the layout. I want to know what's happening with the Thames Water, and I want to know why we've agreed a layout that affects the trees when we specifically saw in the ecology survey that we weren't meant to affect them. Thank you.
I was proposing that at the end to go back through the conditions and understand if the new conditions we want to apply, but there was a point of principle in there as well, which is a different point. Councillor Hunt.
Thank you. So I just wanted to clarify on the social isolationism piece. The point is not to have developments that have hundreds of people streaming through the roads and past people's front doors, etc., etc., etc. Nobody would want that. The point is not to have developments that are kind of landscaped in a way that means that they feel cut off from the surrounding community, so to speak. And in my view, the layout that you have there with the access off of Green Lane and that loop layout would mean that that development in itself could feel quite far removed from the rest of Webber and Badshot Lee. Right, so that's just to clarify on that point, whether you agree with it or not, fine. Secondly, in terms of the design, from an economic standpoint, fantastic. We've got building going up all over the country. We know we need it, and we know that, you know, we are going to build on this site, and this is reserve matters, so we know that's going to happen. The outline was for up to 105 dwellings. There doesn't have to be 105 dwellings built on there, firstly. Secondly, in terms of realism as to what we can expect, yes, granted. However, this development, these houses will be here for decades, long after Taylor Wimpey or whoever have moved on. So to kind of build on what some of the other councillors have said, in my view, it is up to us to ensure that if the development is going to be there, which it is, we have a duty to ensure that the design and the layout is as a higher possible standard as we can, because it will be there for decades and will affect all of the inhabitants of the development and also for Webber and Badshot Lee. And if we're making a decision based on or considering appearance, landscaping and layout, then I think it's been mentioned a couple of times, you know, they can just do so much better. I met an architect a couple of weeks ago who showed me countless examples of developments across the country that were innovative, that really mixed up the landscape, the layout, the design, the materials and everything else. And to me, if we're thinking this is going to be here for decades to come, it's not good enough just to get it approved to meet the quota, so to speak, would be my view.
Okay, that's clear. Councillor Follis, do you have a condition to suggest rather than just commenting on the application?
I think I just want to just very quickly say here that in terms of this is another one of those ones where we're bitten by an outline application, and I don't think none of us are naive to think here that whenever we pass those as an up to number, that isn't what's going to come back at reserved matters. I mean, I don't know quite. Surely we don't sit here and kid ourselves that they're not going to come back at the number that they got at outline. They always do, and it's happened again. So, from my perspective here, I completely agree with Councillor Els. We need to actually do what we have done previously with applications like Woodside Park. And so depending on the mood of the committee and particularly the Ward Councillor's view, I do think we should either defer or reject this application and ask them to come back with something better.
Councillor Edmonds, can you be brief, please?
Just to confirm that Waverley Borough Local Plan Part 1, Policy CC1 and Policy CC2 are confirmed non-applicable.
Sorry, is that a question?
Yes.
I'm not familiar with it.
In principle, they are applicable, but unfortunately, the specifics are not relevant to this particular application, as previously described.
Thank you.
Councillor Keane, do you wish to make a brief point?
Yes, I do, Chairman. Thank you. My understanding is that this is concerning the affordable housing and where it's positioned on this application. My understanding is that we do actually have policy concerning the integration of affordable housing on new build. This guards against ghettoising the affordable properties. And can you just confirm that is right? Because I am very concerned that we are beginning to get applications come in, well, we've had them before, and we've actually turned them down on it. You know, the affordable is stuck out on a limb, and I believe the communal bins are actually placed near those affordable places. So can you just tell me if I'm right, please?
Thank you. Yeah, just to clarify, the bins are for those units. That's why they're near to them. And we were highlighting them just to highlight that they had their bins close to their properties. Also, they have provided the affordable in two different locations. So from our perspective, you have one area which is close to the open space here. And you have another which is quite central to the site, so it's not you know in a far-reaching part of the site. So we're happy with the way it's been provided. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Coburn.
I was just wondering if Councillor Follows actually made a proposal for deferment and whether or not you should be seeking a seconder for that.
I do wish to make that proposal and will be seeking a seconder for that.
Right, so I think that's all the speakers are. So,
if I may make a general comment, having listened to a very interesting discussion as my swan song, if you'll bear with me. It's fair to say, I think, that professional planners share many of your frustrations about design and the quality with which we are faced on a daily basis. And I am heartened greatly as I hand over the baton that you are concerned with these issues and would like to strengthen, I would say, in many cases, what the council can do. It's a matter of judgment, and if you are prepared, and as we sort of get into part 2 and into further discussions about how we can strengthen development management policies, there's a real opportunity. There's a real opportunity to raise the profile of design. The trouble with the planning system is that it's largely permissive. We're largely saying it's okay, and that is what the legislation permits. We're not here to prevent development in that sense. And so quite often we find ourselves frustrated in having to say that things are acceptable because actually, in literal terms, that's what they are. They're okay, they're acceptable. And we do not have the power to refuse them on that basis, on anything other than anything other than what is in planning, what is in planning legislation. So it's a personal remark, and I hope you'll forgive me for saying it, but it's been heartening to me to hear the discussion, because I think that bodes well for the future. And if the councillors, members would like to strengthen local policy in that area, I think we as professional planners would be more than grateful.
So I have a motion to defer. So there's no point in going through the conditions if we're going to defer. So I suggest we consider the motion. If it's successful, then that's it. If it's not successful, then we'll move on and finalise the conditions, and then have a motion on to approve. You're speaking on the motion to defer, Councillor Gray?
No, your comments I would like to come back on. I think you've said there's no point talking conditions, but I think if we are seriously wanting to put a 7kW requirement in here, then we should pass that and put it in and then defer.
No, I agree absolutely, Councillor Gray. But I'm saying is that if there's a motion to defer, then we aren't going to finalise the conditions. If the motion to defer is not successful, i.e. we don't defer it, then we'll go forward this evening and we'll finalise the conditions. That's the way I see it.
Sorry, Chair, through you. Obviously, if the mood of the committee is to defer, then we can also address things like the BAT survey, lighting, etc., that have been raised. Those points are being taken on board. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so a motion has been proposed to defer. Are you speaking on the motion to defer, Councillor Hunt?
So to be clear, the deferral is for them to go away and come up with something else.
Yes.
Is that correct?
That is correct.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, so a motion to defer from Councillor Follows, seconded by Councillor Else, I believe. So are we ready to vote on that? So we are voting, unless anyone wants to speak on the motion to defer, I hope. No, right. So green is to defer, red is to continue the discussion, and blue is to abstain. So it's 13 to defer, 3 against deferment, and 3 abstentions. So the motion has been passed, and so this will be deferred. So that completes the business, I believe. So may I wish you all Merry Christmas, and have a Happy New Year. Thank you.
With the officers, what it is they're actually going to, point by point, to deal with in the deferral?
Well, I
think Zach would like a word.
Okay, Zach, sorry, carry on.
Well, Chairman, through you, I'd almost turn that on its head and ask members to give us, as officers, a bit of a steer as to what you are looking for us, at the end of the day. Obviously, I've heard certain points. I've heard the point about loss of trees around the boundaries. I've heard the point about the location of the affordable housing and integrating that. I think there are some points around design that are subjective. I think, playing devil's advocate in terms of the character of the road to the north. That's characterised by narrow plots with semi-detached pairs. I think that is replicated in the layout quite well, so they have certainly taken that on board. But I think you want us to look at something that perhaps is a little bit more innovative, but taking on board the fact that the test in planning is not can you make something better, it's is the thing that's in front of you acceptable or not, and have you got defendable reasons. So I think if we could have a bit more of a steer, I don't think we can go down the density line because 105 or up to 105 dwellings has already been approved under the outline. So it would be more about the specific design now.
The points I had were the trees and the work on the trees and the effects on bats, and also lights and effects on bats. The charging point specification is a minor point, and there was some issue about the. Well, it's easy to define. And the Thames water condition that was raised by Councillor Townsend.
And the layout for the SUDs, it was specifically referenced a particular drawing,
okay,
and that wasn't. Yes. I couldn't find it.
Yes. Councillor Adams, do you have anything you want? I mean, we don't have to go through them all now, but you. I'd like to see some more imaginative design from the house. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's understood. Councillor Townsend.
Well, if at all possible, I mean, if we're looking at it, you know, and trying to give some feedback, you know, the leap being shoved over in one corner is not really acceptable. You want to have a play area somewhere more central. We want the houses not just in rows. We do want to see some staggering, I think. We want to see, you know, some kind of imagination rather than just, many of those roads are just very straight. So having some kind of central play area where it's not shoved over in one corner. If you want your children to be able to play out, you don't want them to be travelling, you know, all being down in one corner of the estate, really. You want, and it would encourage maybe antisocial behaviour around that block of flats as well. So have a play area which is overlooked. It makes sense. You want it overlooked by residents around it, not shoved in one corner. And I know it was something that was said by our particular in Waverley, our parks people, that they would prefer if it wasn't shoved in the corner. So if this is an opportunity to relook at it, then let's relook at some of the negatives that have already been raised, as well as the affecting the trees and the bats. Thank you.
Councillor Hunt, do you have a...
distribution.
If they're long points, they can go into an email and stuff. But anyway, Councillor Coburn.
Yeah, sorry to keep you, Chairman, but I do think this is so important for Webburn and Badshot-Lee. I agree totally with Councillor Townsend here. What we're putting on this site, if you like, is a mini village. We're replicating Webburn and Badshot-Lee on one site because we're putting in one-bedroom flats, two-bedroom this, three-bedroom the other. Now, if we are, then we create a place. And that's what this thing doesn't do at all. And as Councillor Townsend said, it starts with the wrong premise. The premise is we've got this nice development, we want it perhaps centred around, you know, some green space, and we want it to be something that we as a borough are proud of. And I think we should be saying this in what we're saying to the developers. This really is just not good enough. Your first attempt, okay, we'll give you a delta minus, you know, go back, rethink, and come back with something that sits well in its context, because this doesn't. It just is a little extra bit added onto Webburn and Badshot-Lee. It's got no sense of shape or place at all. And I think we should be saying this loudly and clearly to every developer.
Thank you. That's very good. Councillor Elson.
Thank you. I think it's worth noting that the play area in the corner is probably there because of the overhead power lines. There's probably not much they can build underneath there. But I think it's worth always remembering the difference between shared ownership and affordable housing. And it's the affordable housing that's being dumped in the corner, and the shared ownership is very nicely integrated with the rest. But generally, I concur with everybody else. A better standard of design of the buildings and the layout would be nice to see. And it worked well in Cranley when people went away. Hopefully the developer won't take the appeal route, and they will try and work with our officers to come up with a good scheme. Thank you.
Yes, and Cranley, we ended up in the end with some people who did take that on board and one or two who didn't. It was interesting. Councillor Edmondson.
The Thames Water infrastructure problem is critical. It really needs to be solved without any doubt.
Thank you. Anything else? Sorry, Zach, you want to...
Chairman, just through you, just very briefly, just to reassure members that I'll give Taylor Wimpey a call in the morning and invite them in early in the new year, and we'll seek to get something better. And hopefully when we bring it back, members will see an improvement.
Okay. In that case, quick one.
Yeah, just if they are reconsidering things, then they might as well reconsider things like putting some solar panels on the roofs and maybe having heat source pumps for heating and things like that.
I hope they would. And I'm sure we'll make them in due course when we get the committees in place.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. In that case, this time, Merry Christmas. Thank you.